How do you deal with the issue of land when it comes up, the land reform debate?
How we deal with it is just to be frank, in that it's a historical issue that we have to deal with. It's been going on, or rather we've had 23, 24 years of land reform practice, which hasn't necessarily yielded the outcomes that people want to see. And now we're asking the question, is the Constitution a barrier to that? A lot of analysis, for instance, if you look at the high-level panel report that was convened under former President Motlanthe, had a very extensive analysis of land reform and came to the conclusion that you don't need a constitutional amendment. And also, there have been many analysts, Temek and Toby, for instance, who've argued that if you read the Constitution as it is, there is already scope to expropriate without compensation if you can justify it along those elements of just and equitable compensation. You know, it reminds me a bit of, say, you setting up a fine, for instance, in competition cases. There are criteria you come up with, and you could possibly come up with a zero fine in instances where the company is about to collapse, etc., etc. You know, the same kind of reasoning. You can look at the factors in Section 25 and say, given the history of the use of the property, how it was acquired, any state support that had been provided in the past, we conclude, therefore, that compensation is zero. And it would be rational, argued out, and with obviously the benefit of due process, and that's all already provided for. But then, of course, on the other hand, there are people who argue that, well, if that was the case, it would have been done, therefore there must be some impediment. So you do have the parliamentary process which will try to settle that question. I guess what is clear to me is that because that question even arises, maybe there is scope for just clarification. Either clarification by testing the provisions as they stand, which is part of the governing party's plan and an approach to land reform, to say, let's test what's happened, let's test what we have now, but test it with expropriation without compensation. Whereas in the past, the tendency has been to pay top market value. On the other hand, there might be an argument to say maybe it should be written explicitly into the Constitution that you can have zero compensation. I don't know how legal minds would think about such a very specific thing to write, but I think that the process in Parliament will take us some way towards resolving that.